Hello and welcome to India's World. Today we are going to discuss the ongoing democracy protests in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, usually an orderly financial hub, is in eruption. Youthful protesters have occupied the central business district of Hong Kong. Thousands of them have deployed umbrellas to protect themselves from tear gas, leading some to describe the protests as the Umbrella Revolution. When Britain gave the reins of Hong Kong back to China in 1997, Beijing had given certain assurances. Under what was termed one country, two systems, Hong Kong was allowed to keep its common law system and assured of greater rights than those prevalent in mainland China. The residents of Hong Kong had hoped that by 2017, they would be able to elect their own chief executive to run the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Now, China says that there will be no open nominations for the job and only those who have been cleared by the Communist Party would be allowed to contest. These demonstrations have turned into the biggest public protest in Hong Kong since Chinese rule. To discuss the developments in Hong Kong, we have with us a distinguished panel of experts. We have with us today Professor Alka Acharya. She is Director and Senior Fellow at Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi. Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, he is Professor in Chinese Studies at the Center for East Asian Studies, School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. And my old friend, Dr. Jabin, he is Assistant Director and Fellow, again at the Institute of Chinese Studies in Delhi. I welcome all of you to this discussion. Professor Acharya, what is the extent of autonomy that Hong Kong enjoys under the one country, two systems framework? And how independent is it of Chinese political structure, legal system, and the rights that are prevalent in mainland China?
The bottom line is that the political control is vested in the Central People's Government, that is to say PRC. Administrative, financial, economic, legislative, administrative, social autonomy has been protected under that basic law. So,
basic law is the constitution of Hong Kong.
It goes by way of being the constitution. So some people call it a semi-constitution because it is a document which was adopted by the PRC in 1990, and that really regulates Hong Kong affairs, under which all these freedoms are given. But the crucial point where the election of process of the chief executive of Hong Kong and the political regulations guiding this process, that's firmly in Beijing's control. And the basic law states as much. So I think that is the extent of autonomy, if you like, that Hong Kong has.
Professor Kondapalli, what is it that is fueling the Hong Kong protesters? Why do they want more democracy? If, as Alka says, the basic law says that People's Republic of China or the Central Committee or the Communist Party will control the election of the chief executive, then why are they interpreting the basic law in a different manner than Beijing? And why is it that Beijing doesn't want to allow them to have basic democratic rights?
Well, this is a revision of the promises that Deng Xiaoping made in the 1980s and following its inscription in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. The original promise Deng Xiaoping made when he started discussing with the British under Margaret Thatcher was that the one country, two systems would include universal suffrage for the people ultimately. And 2017 has been mentioned in passing about the universal suffrage, whereby everyone would get the right to elect their representatives. Now, recently, the National People's Congress, which is the Chinese parliament, had passed a resolution stating that the 2017 elections will be kind of controlled by nominations, and there will be a vetting process of the candidate for the CEO, Chief Executive Officer of the Hong Kong. With the result that there is tension in Hong Kong about the 2017 elections, primarily because of this revision that Beijing made from the original 1997 position to that they will adopt universal suffrage, and now it is being reduced to vetting the process. Why China is doing this?
Vetting only the candidates.
Vetting
so if there
the
are only
candidates.
5 candidates, those
Exactly.
5 will be vetted by the PRC-nominated committee, and these people will then contest.
That's
so
right.
the people you are voting for, their number will be determined and their nature will be determined through a nomination process, But there will be universal suffrage in terms of every person who's eligible to vote being able to vote, right?
In the LegCo so far, the Legislative Council of Hong Kong, in the LegCo so far, it's more than half are nominated members. Only a few are actually directly elected by the constituents in Hong Kong. So with the result that there is a kind of frustration among the Hong Kong people, and this is generated with so many factors. Number one, Hong Kong has a crony capitalism, much like Russia, much like other countries, where you have huge wealth dominated, and the Hong Kong people do not have the basic, economic, rights and so on. For example, today to buy a house, a small house in Hong Kong, is very difficult. It's a dream for many majority of Hong Kong people to even buy a house.
We'll come to the issues of the agitation in a minute, but I want to understand the nature of this agitation first and who are the people behind it. So, Jabin, what is this group called Occupy Central? And is it the only group? Because there's also the Hong Kong Students' Federation, which is involved, and there's a group called Scholarism.
Yeah.
That group is also there. So what is the nature and the profile of the protesters?
As you've identified, there are at least 3 major groups involved in this. The Hong Kong Students' Federation is one, the Scholarism, a bunch of younger school students, in fact, is one, and the Occupy Central with Peace and Love. This is a group of Hong Kong Democrats. Now, there are differences between these groups. In fact, one of the important features of this movement is that it largely seems leaderless. There isn't one point of contact or one point of targeting, in fact, that can be said about the Hong Kong protests. In contrast to, say, the sunflower protests that took place in Taiwan a few months ago, in fact.
But there is networking amongst the
Of course,
groups.
they've used technology, they've networked, and in fact, the scholarism, the younger demonstrators actually pushed matters to a forefront because they have sort of preempted or left the old-style Democrats, the ones, Martin Lee and party, behind in a manner of speaking. Though Martin Lee is active, I think the important thing was that the fact that these were young demonstrators and the fact that tear gas and pepper spray was used also forced a lot of ordinary Hong Kongers to come in. So actually the protest is it's across classes.
Okay, quickly.
The basis for the position that the Chinese leadership in Beijing is taking, that this movement is illegal and unconstitutional, is that it's still, the protesters' demand does not really accord with what the basic law or the constitution stipulates. This demand that universal suffrage be extended is there. But the protest is now about that we don't just want universal suffrage, we want direct elections, which is not in part of either the basic law or what the leaders have said any time.
All right, we need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again with you with this interesting discussion in a bit. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the democracy protests in Hong Kong and their possible consequences. Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, you were saying something about the demands of the protesters being more than political. You're suggesting that they were also about growing social inequality. For example, people are unable to purchase a house. You said it's a dream come true if you can, buy houses which are priced astronomically high. There's migration from mainland China. Hong Kong has topped the Economist list of crony capitalism index. It's beaten Russia and occupied #1 position. The faith in the government is at an all-time low. So, can you tell us that how did it become a movement from demanding universal suffrage to a movement that wants comprehensive reforms?
I think this is in the nature of the democratization. We have seen that in Taiwan. We have seen that in new democracies which came up in the 90s, post-Soviet disintegration. We've seen this in East Europe. We have seen this in other places. That they are demanding not just political reforms, but the breaking up of the structures of domination. In Taiwan, for instance, it is controlled by the Kuomintang party, the economic levers and so on, the huge conglomerates that they created. Likewise, in Hong Kong, this democratization has not happened in terms of the economic structures. These are all Li Ka-shings, Stephen Ho's, who have controlled Hong Kong for a long time.
So you're saying it's a natural process?
It's a natural process of democratization in the economic field as well.
Okay. Jabin, Hong Kong protesters have actually had a history of success. In 2003, they protested against Article 23, which was a security-related law which impinged on their freedom, and managed to pressure the government into shelving it. In 2012, they protested against the education plan, which made certain textbooks compulsory, which censored out Tiananmen Square, Cultural Revolution, and people said it is communist brainwashing. There also they were able to push that plan back. Do you think this time is different? Do you think they will succeed in pushing universal suffrage and the kind of reforms they want? Do you think they'll succeed this time also, or is it much more serious this time?
No, I don't think, I mean, it depends on what you define as success. Yeah. I don't think the Hong Kong protesters are also expecting that all their demands will be met. I think this demonstration in Hong Kong, as you saw the demonstration in Taiwan, are all a lot smarter, much more evolved than previous demonstrations in this region. They have seen the experiences of demonstrations.
Do they have an end game in mind?
I think the end game essentially is to see that, let's be clear, the PRC has not said that there will not be reforms or changes after 2017. At this point, they say they are going to hold a hard line because that's the nature of the government in Beijing. Okay. But I think the protesters are asking for Siva Long's, the chief executive's resignation. Now that will not happen immediately because that would mean a loss of face, but it will happen eventually, I think. The Hong Kong protest, to carry on from what was said a bit before, is also about identity. The contrast between Hong Kong, the role expected of Hong Kong has changed over time. In the beginning, during the communist era, or pre-handover period, Hong Kong was seen as a gateway to China, as a sort of model for the Chinese to follow once the reform started. Today, Hong Kong's importance in the economic realm seems to decline. It is in competition with Shanghai, for example. So in that sense, there is a certain sense of angst among ordinary Hong Kongers that their specialness in the scheme of things seems to be eroding. These new protesters, the scholars and protesters, these are the first generation of Hong Kongers who've grown up under Chinese rule. So they have a different worldview, they've used to different sets of freedoms than their parents, but also different from the mainlanders. Yeah. So I think those sort of issues are coming into play here.
Okay, but they don't know where they're going as yet.
I think their idea is to ensure that their voice is heard. Yeah. I think they will play the long game. Okay. They might settle for some compromises at this stage, yeah, while continuing their protest over 2017.
You wanted to say something?
The end game, as proposed by the protesters, is number one, the resignation of the chief executive,
which is already mentioned,
Chun-ying, and second is universal suffrage. And since this is for the 2017 elections, which is going to be a long drawn process, it is not clear whether the demonstrators will go home if these two are not met.
They can't stay there till 2017 either.
That's true.
Yeah. So there has to be some
problem with the success.
There is already universal suffrage. That is what the Chinese the Beijing has promised them. But the question is about nominations. They are only accepting 3 nominated candidates.
There's no free choice for candidates.
There's no free choice for candidates. Okay. That's the problem.
Now, why is it, Alka, that polls indicate that the majority of Hong Kong residents actually oppose these demonstrations? There's a study by last week by Chinese University of Hong Kong, a poll which says 46% of Hong Kongers do not support the pro-democracy movement, while only 31% support it. But if you look at the age profile, then majority of the youngsters, 47% of those between the age group of those below 24, they support the demonstration, and 21% of those support the demonstration in the age group of 40 to 59. So it's the youngsters who support the demonstration. As the age profile changes, people are not supporting the demonstrations. Why is that?
Yeah, I think the larger context of politics in Hong Kong and the nature of the society has to be kept in mind as we look at this extremely mixed kind of character of the protest. As you said, polls have indicated that people are divided on the issue. If we can identify 3 or 4 different factions that have been operating since the takeover by the Chinese communists. And even at that time, it was quite clear that 50 years they would not allow, they would not do anything to the system except that the leader would be decided in Beijing, but otherwise they would let everything else go on as before. So you have a lot of, and pro-Beijing people have always been on the scene. So clearly the nature of the democracy movement itself, you can have liberals there, you have radicals, you have even nativists who are actually very...
What Jabin was saying is the younger lot who were born after the handing over of Hong Kong, they actually have grown up with different values. Why should they believe in Beijing saying unilaterally that for 50 years we will do nothing?
No, precisely.
They won't change here and now.
That's precisely what I'm saying, that because of that kind of a backdrop, you have the earlier generations who were content, because in the main, the freedoms were left untouched. Media was as free as before. There were huge amounts of economic and administrative freedoms. And the British had left behind certain agencies which provided for oversight on the government, which were pretty strong agencies. So in the main, it went on, and therefore the earlier generations were not, in that sense, going over to the other side. The newer ones, the question really is, how do these student groups really identify the core issue? And I think the core issue here is, which is that they are saying direct elections for the leader, which is really a rather radical.
Okay, so, quickly, because we are running out of time in this segment. Because Beijing has supported the harsh measures, tear gassing, etc., used by Hong Kong police, and because ever since Xi Jinping took over as party chief and president of China, China has increased the constraints on dissidents. The prison sentences on dissidents are harsher. Do you think that's an indication of how they will deal with these protesters in Hong Kong also? Do you think the shadow of Tiananmen Square also is sort of at the back of people's mind in what might happen to these protesters?
Well, one is the factor of Chinese nationalism, which is a major defining moment in this. Second is the Chinese leaders' emphasis on one country rather than two systems, meaning that you have a separate system in China and in Hong Kong, the two systems. In speeches by Premier Li Keqiang as well as President Xi Jinping, they were emphasizing more on one country.
No, but are the protesters in for dire consequences as the People's Daily editorial warns them of?
Well, it is not clear what, how resolved the protesters are, how long drawn the protests will take place, and so on. But what is clear from the Chinese University of Hong Kong surveys as well as the other is that the younger lot were also influenced by the broader ideas coming up from Occupy Wall Street, the Tahrir Square incident, the Jasmine Revolution, Arab Spring, Sunflower Movement, and a host of other things.
You've not answered my question, but
we need
to take a break at this point.
Okay.
We need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again with this interesting discussion in a bit. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're discussing the democracy protests in Hong Kong and their consequences. Alka, I interrupted you.
No, I just thought
something.
it might be interesting to put on the table that before he became president, Xi Jinping was actually the chairman of the leading small group on Hong Kong and Macau affairs. So as vice president, he's handled Hong Kong and Macau for 5 years, and he's quite aware of the nuances. I don't think that with Xi Jinping, you're not going to see Tiananmen repeated. Xi Jinping is not Deng Xiaoping. Yeah. What we might see is a strong message to the outside world, hands off, because remember, Hong Kong has always been the key spying post for the West throughout history. So stay off Hong Kong. Internally, he will use a combination of the iron hand and velvet glove.
Okay. Professor Kondapalli, how worried would China be that the protests in Hong Kong might embolden anti-Beijing movements elsewhere, say in Xinjiang or in Tibet? And what would be the impact of how they handle Hong Kong on the people of Taiwan? What message will it send them about one country, two systems?
Indeed, in 1978, when the one country, two systems was proposed, it was actually Taiwan. Hong Kong came in as a kind of default in the negotiations between the British and the Chinese. So it is actually Taiwan which was the target for reunification, and this is proposed.
Still is.
Still it is. Yet the Taiwanese are not really interested in this idea of one country, two systems. Because they have everything to lose than gain as part of the one country, two systems. And there is a lot of resistance, including President Ma Ying-jeou, who had been critical last few days about the events in Hong Kong and the Beijing's response. There is also a certain, we keep hearing about, interference in internal affairs of countries and so on. When the protesters started saying we have leaked information about, some U.S. NGO funding some of these, I think these are misleading because you're accusing 500,000, 5 lakh Hong Kongers being financed by some outsiders.
What about the impact of this?
It will have an
Xinjiang
impact definitely on the Tibetans, on the Uyghurs. Rubaya Khadir made a statement a couple of days ago saying that this will have an impact, especially the Uyghurs who are becoming very restive in the last 3-4 years. The number of incidents in Xinjiang have increased substantially in terms of protests against the Han migration.
On the other hand, if, for example, China is able to manage these protests peacefully through negotiations, it sends a positive message also to Xinjiang and Tibet. It's not only a negative message that I'm talking about.
Indeed, but the crux of the problem is whether the Communist Party is willing to share power with the people. That's the crux of the matter. Either in Hong Kong or in Tibet or in Xinjiang or in Taiwan or in Mongolia, Inner Mongolia.
Okay. Jabin, to what extent would the outcome of the protests in Hong Kong depend on the attitude of the Hong Kong business community? What would happen if the business community supports the protest, and what would happen if it distances itself from it?
Actually, this is one of the ironic aspects of this whole issue. The Communist Party of China, which once upon a time, before Hong Kong had returned to the mainland, used to support labor movements, people's movements in Hong Kong, today hobnobs with the business elite. So I think, and in fact, a scholar recently came out saying that democracy is not suitable for Hong Kong because it does not take care of the interests of the business elite. So I think, in fact, Xi Jinping had a meeting on September 26th with a bunch of Hong Kong tycoons discussing the Hong Kong state of affairs. So I think there is a very important aspect here that needs to be considered. Okay. Essentially, these protests are also, as was mentioned, these protests are also a reaction to this crony capitalism that is ongoing in Hong Kong. Okay. Now, one aspect here is what is Beijing going to do? See, the Siva Leung, by the way, was only one of the candidates for when he won, who won by a very tiny margin. But the second candidate was the one, Henry Thang, was the guy who the business tycoons supported. So I think eventually, if Siva Leung falls by the wayside, there's another person to step into his shoes.
Alka, is there a compromise possible between what is politically acceptable to Beijing and something that would also satisfy the protesters?
I think that's what they're going to work at. I think both sides will have to moderate the kind of positions they've taken. Yep. In the immediate run, definitely the resignation of the chief executive is not going to be accepted because that immediately, delegitimizes the whole system. So that would be held on for a while.
That's the difference between a democratic system and a non-democratic system. In a democratic system, a resignation by a chief executive doesn't mean a thing because somebody else can always step in.
But then you have to do it through a proper procedure. You see, you can't, everybody in parliament can stand up and demand the prime minister's resignation, but then there has to be a procedure, a certain motion has to be passed
and so on. The procedure is he just resigns and people elect a new one. So the legislative council in Hong Kong can elect a new chief executive.
No, that doesn't happen like that, that is what...
So that's what I'm saying. The difference between a democratic system and a non-democratic system is precisely this.
No, but
that
then we have
transition has to be closely monitored and directed.
But even democracies have certain processes. Now, Hong Kong has a very different political process. Now, either we say that we follow the logic that is there inherent, or we say, okay, let this be completely dominated by...
The protest is actually against the logic of the system.
No, I think essentially the problem is Beijing is willing to follow the letter of the basic law, but not the spirit. Yeah. And I think that is where the Hong Kongers and Beijing have a difference.
My last question to you, Professor Kondapalli. As the Chinese middle class grows, do you see democracy demands spreading in mainland China also? How tenable is this system? If we keep on analyzing it within its own logic, it seems perfect. But once you start questioning the logic of the system, which is what people in Hong Kong are doing, then the system can change, can fall apart. So do you see that happening in the long run within mainland China?
No, I don't see that happening. Although there are some triggers. For example, the middle class spread in China, which is about 150 million out of 1.4 billion people. they are demanding larger share in power structure, and so there is the.
But you're saying nothing will change for the time being.
Indeed, because although the Communist Party introduced elections at the village level, the Communist Party base is at the county level, at the tehsil level. So that's the reason why it is not possible.
We've run out of time. I have no option but to close the discussion here. So I thank you all for coming here. Dr. Jabin Jacob, Professor Srikanth Kondapalli, Professor Alka Acharya. Thank you for participating in this discussion. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week with another interesting issue. Till then, goodbye and thanks for watching.